I'm going to give a brief overview of the history of the Highline, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how we went from this, what was maybe sort of a crazy dream, into reality. So the Highline runs, or used to run, right down the middle of Manhattan, right down 10th Avenue. And it was known as Death Avenue because so many people were run over by the trains that the railroad hired a guy on horseback to run in front of the trains, and he was known as the West Side Cowboy. But still, about one person a month was killed, so they elevated it, and they cut it right down through the middle of the blocks. And it was finished in 1934, and it went right through buildings, as I was just talking about. It brought in a lot of food. It was nicknamed the Lifeline of New York, because a lot of these warehouses were refrigerated warehouses. It served the meat market. But with the rise of interstate trucking, it was used less and less. And it was abandoned. The last train was a trainload of frozen turkeys at Thanksgiving in 1980. And then it was unused. And this wildscape started taking over. And I live in the West Village and first saw it from the street. And I fell in love with that steel structure from below. But then when Josh and I first went on top, there's a steel structure, but then there was 1.5 miles of wildflowers right in the middle of Manhattan. And that's what we really began to fall in love with.
So Robert and I met at a community board meeting in 1999, and we just happened to sit next to each other. We didn't know each other. And we were at that meeting because we'd read in the newspaper that the Highline was going to be torn down. And it ran through our neighborhood, and it connected 22 blocks and ran for 1.5 miles and connected 3 neighborhoods. And we thought you could probably do something really amazing with it. But nobody else was really thinking along those lines. Everybody at that meeting was in favor of tearing it down. So we exchanged business cards, and we met up a few days later and started an organization to try and save the Highline, very reluctantly at first, because we realized what a big task it was going to be. From the beginning, we made a commitment to good design. This is the logo that Paula Scher at Pentagram made for us very, very early on in 1999. And we were just 2 guys, self-employed, working out of our home offices with none of the skills that you need to do something like this. We weren't architects, we weren't preservationists, we had no political experience. But the quality of our logo and the other graphic materials that we produced gave people some confidence in our fledgling organization, and also signaled that if they supported us and we could one day build something on the Highline, that it would be beautifully designed. One of our other challenges was nobody could see what was up there from down on the street. You couldn't see this incredible landscape up on top. So we found a terrific American photographer, Joel Sternfeld, who went up there. He fell in love with the place too, and he spent over a year up there photographing. And these amazing photographs became a real key part of our advocacy. Mayor Giuliani's administration wanted to tear the Highline down, and so we had to challenge that policy in court, and that meant raising money for legal fees, which we did in the beginning primarily through events. So this is one of our early events. It happened to be on Bastille Day. This is a famous restaurateur from the meatpacking district, Florent, who came to our party dressed as Marie Antoinette with a Highline theme. There's trains running around his waist and around his wig. A lot of people, when they come to us and ask us what they should do in starting organizations that are doing similar kinds of projects to ours, we always tell them, start fundraising as soon as you possibly can, not only for the resources that the fundraising brings to you, but because it really makes you create a strong organization and greatly increases the sense of connectivity that your supporters feel for the project. A different kind of community formed around the Highline from a very early point than formed around a lot of other preservation groups in the Highline, in New York City. It was younger. I think a lot of it stems from the fact that a lot of preservation projects are about stopping something, stopping a building from being torn down, or stopping a development that people don't like. We were trying to stop demolition, but really the larger project was a vision, a positive, creative vision, and that drew in a lot of artists and architects and designers. There was also a much larger gay following in this project than in some others, because Robert and I are both gay and brought in all of our friends.
We didn't mean to put this slide up next. But it's no coincidence that it was one of our favorites. But so we had started gaining some traction on the project. More people started hearing about it. But in the city and across the country, no one knew what the Highline was. So we did an ideas competition. And this wasn't a design competition. We didn't really have the right to build anything. So it was really to create different ways of thinking about what you would do with this rusting railroad with weeds growing up on top of it. So this was one of my favorites, was a mile-long lap pool that would run right through the city. And again, this was just helping people think about, wow, there's other things you could do with this. It's, than just run trains back up there. Another one was leave that beautiful, pristine landscape alone and then put an urban roller coaster that would go right through the city. And we had the exhibition of all the entries. We had, I think, 720 entries from 36 countries. It was one of the first competitions that was done online. And this is where we started building this really sort of international following for this project. But the reason we wanted to do the exhibition at Grand Central is so people wouldn't think about this just as a local project, that it could have an impact beyond just the neighborhood it ran through. So, Giuliani signed the demolition order right 2 days before he left office. Bloomberg came in office, was much more supportive, but 9/11 happened. We had economic tough times. He didn't really care about the pretty pictures of Joel Sternfeld's pictures of the Highline. We had to prove it made economic sense. So we commissioned an economic feasibility study to show that we thought at the time it would cost about $100 million to build. And we said, OK, over a 20-year time period, the economic benefits to the city based on increased property tax revenues would be about $250 million. It turns out we got both of those numbers wrong. It's cost so far about $150 million to build. But we've just updated the study, and the benefits to the city now are looking to be just under shy of about $1 billion. So it's turned out to be a good investment. So that helped get, at first it was just a community. That's the other thing we say. It's great to fight, the powers that be. But at some point, if you want to do a big project, it has to be a public-private partnership. We partnered with Bloomberg, Senator Clinton, Schumer, Christine Quinn. And that's where this became this public-private partnership. And I love this photo because they're managing not to look at each other. I think it's like something politicians learn. I don't know that, but. So then we had gotten the community on board, we had gotten the elected officials on board, but the property owners were still fighting to tear it down. The railroad owned the structure, but the property owners owned property underneath it. So they still wanted to tear it down. So we partnered with the city planning commissioner, Amanda Burden, and the mayor's office to do something that they had done first to save Grand Central several decades before, which is called the transfer of development rights. Normally, you can only transfer to a property next door to you. This allows you to transfer anywhere in the neighborhood. And when that passed, that sort of was the next hurdle in getting support for the project.
So with the city on board, it was not about design ideas anymore, but we actually had to create a real design for the Highline. So we did another competition, this one in partnership with the city. And the central challenge of it was there was this landscape that we loved up there, and we wanted to open it to the public. And you could bring small groups up there, like the group in this picture, occasionally, and still that landscape could live. But if you opened it up to the public on a regular basis, it would be trampled and destroyed. So the challenge that we gave to all the competitors in the competition was, how do you create a landscape that refers back to what was so compelling about the original condition and still allows public access? So the team that won, James Corner Field Operations, their landscape architects, Diller, Scafidio, and Renfro, who are architects, and the Dutch horticulturist Piet Oudolf, won with a proposal to create an entirely new walkway system made out of cement planks that break apart at their edges and allow the plant material to come up through the cracks in the planks, very much the way that the original self-seated landscape on the Highline came up through the gravel ballast. You can see that under construction here with the rail tracks being reinstalled after we rehabilitated the structure and the planked walkway system being installed. I'm going to take you just on a very brief tour of a few of the highlights as you go up the Highline, and starting with a rendering, because a lot of architects who followed our project were really amazed that when we constructed the project, it looked so much like the renderings. Here you see the end of the Highline, right, that we just seen rendered previously. This is viewed from above. You can see how the landscape actually pushes up through the concrete pathways, creating a seamless, cohesive environment. One of the things that we wanted was not two different zones of walkway and landscape, but having the walkway and the landscape integrated into a single and cohesive place. A lot of attention was played to making it a social place, not just a linear path that you walk through. So we paid extra attention to how gathering areas were designed and how seating areas were designed to really foster a lot of social interaction and vibrancy along the line. Part of this was a water feature. This is in the same area where you just saw those benches. And we wanted water because it's very soothing sound and it's cooling in summer. But we were very spatially constrained. There's not a lot of room up on the Highline. So this was a system by just having the water skim across the walkway. You don't lose any of your occupiable space. You can still walk around in it barefoot. One of the things that was always most interesting about the Highline when it had trains running in it was the trains ran through the buildings, and it remains one of the most interesting things now that it's a public park. You have this very unusual dynamic of the public realm going through these holes of privately controlled property, and inside the shell of this private building is this public space. In this case, it's an old Nabisco factory building where they used to make Oreo cookies and Unita biscuits. It's now called Chelsea Market, and it's where Google has a large part of its New York offices. One of the architects on the team said it was his job to save the Highline from architecture. And by that, he wanted to avoid adding a lot of additional structures to the Highline. And instead, they concentrated on cuts and removals and reveals. So this is a place called the 10th Avenue Square where a whole massive steel girders were pulled out to allow visitors to descend into the structure where they can view the street below through this glass wall. And there you can see that from another angle. It really turns the street below into a theater when viewed from above. And if you're standing down on the street, the people up in the 10th Avenue Square are as if they're on a stage. There's a long stretch that's very linear and continuous in a straight line. And so the design team has created a lot of varied planting conditions along that straight line, starting with low-lying grasses and perennials in the Chelsea grasslands, moving to much denser, highly planted areas in the Chelsea thicket, moving to the Highline's only lawn at 23rd Street, and up to a place called the Falcone Flyover, which is an elevated structure on top of an elevated structure that takes you up into the canopy of trees. This photo shows the really unique relationship of the Highline to the city around it, going through the center of city blocks as it makes its way from the West Village up through Chelsea to the West Side Rail Yards.
So when we first started thinking about when we were going to open the Highline, we thought we'd maybe have about 300,000 people a year. And now we get 300,000 people a year. I mean, 300,000 people every 2 weeks, basically. We've already had 2 million people this summer. And, but I'll tell you a secret if y'all want to know when to come at night or on the weekdays. It's usually not that. For some reason, tourists love to come in the middle of the day when it's really hot on Saturday and Sunday. And so it's been great for the economic development, but it's also encouraged a lot of great architecture in the neighborhood, not just on the Highline. This is a rendering of the new Whitney Museum, which is coming to the base of the Highline. They're moving from their building on Madison Avenue to this new. It's going to be about 4 times as big as their current space. And Renzo Piano has designed it. They just broke ground this last spring. And there's a spot where you can stand at 18th Street where you can see buildings by Frank Gehry, Jean Nouvel, Neil Denari, Shigeru Ban. So it's become this sort of architect's row to see a lot of historic buildings and a lot of great new architecture. And another thing that's a little different about the Highline is that it's not maintained by the city. So Friends of the Highline, the group that Josh and I sort of started by exchanging business cards, now manages the line for the city through a license agreement. So we pay all of the costs of managing and operating it, all the gardeners, all the maintenance workers, the bathroom attendants. And this was not we didn't pioneer that. It was really done by the Central Park Conservancy, but we followed that model of how the Highline is maintained. Now, we love that a lot of tourists come to the Highline, But first and foremost, we want it to be for New Yorkers. I'm from San Antonio, and people say, oh, do you want it to be like a river walk? And we say, well, you know, that's just tourists. And we really want this to be for locals. So we devote almost all of the programming we do. We have about 300 free programs throughout the year for locals in the neighborhood and in the city. This is a step festival we did in the beginning of the summer. We do a lot of programs for families and kids throughout the year. We also do focus a lot on art. The Highline runs right through the heart of the art gallery district. But it can be that's sort of an insular, you know, when you go to art galleries, you don't know which one to go on or if you're really even wanted there. So we try to bring art out into the public. And whenever you go up there, this is a stained glass window piece that we've installed in the Chelsea Market space. And there's always about 5 to 6 different public artworks that you'll find as you're walking along the line. The Highline's not done. We still have the last section, which I think is the most beautiful. That shot Josh showed of Joel Sternfeld's photograph was taken from here. And it's the part that runs around the rail yards. This is the last really large undeveloped spot in Manhattan. And it's still owned by the railroad. And that's what we're focusing a lot of our efforts on, is to get ownership of this and to open this as soon as possible to the public. Right now, if you go to this area, it ends right at 34th Street at the bottom there. That's the Javits Center, the convention center. Maybe some of you all have been. It's not a great neighborhood right now. It's a little forlorn. You probably, if you get there, you want to leave. But that's going to change. This is where the Jet Stadium was going to go at one point. Now it's zoned for 11 million square feet of new development. So to give you an idea, that's like downtown Seattle times 2. And it's going to be developed by the related companies, residential, retail, and business commercial. And so that's why we feel the Highline is so important, because it's going to be the only historical connection to this new part of the city.
Robert talked a little bit about some of the programs and activities we plan for the Highline. A lot of things happen on the Highline that are unplanned, and this is one of them. This is a woman named Patty Heffley, who right when we opened the first section of the Highline in 2009, one of our security lights wasn't pointed the right way, and it pointed over at her fire escape. And at first she yelled and screamed at us a lot every time we walked by, and then she realized that it was creating this stage out of her fire escape, and there was this constant audience of people going by on the Highline, so she started taking advantage of that and curating these performances, mostly torch song singers, and she called it the Highline Renegade Cabaret, and it got to be really popular. And for many people who came to the Highline during our first season, their favorite thing about the Highline was Patty and the Renegade Cabaret. And we wanted to end on this slide because I think it shows two different things. One of which is a lot of parks are designed to be refuges from the city or escapes from the city. And the Highline is really very different from that. It's a very narrow park, and the things that are happening around it, on buildings, on rooftops, are as much as a part of the park experience as being in the park itself. And secondly, we've planned a lot of things. We've told you about a lot of the plans that we made to make this possible. But you can't plan everything, and a lot of times the unplanned things are the best things. We have over tens of thousands of people coming to the Highline on a daily basis, and then multiple thousands more interacting with it from rooftops and windows and balconies. And it's what all these people bring to it. The social interaction and vibrancy that they bring to the experience of the Highline that make it such a special place. It's really all of these people who bring the Highline to life. Thank you.